Hello and welcome back, and today I want to talk about the WD SSD range. I've done videos like this before when I focused on their hard drive series, that wonderful rainbow spectrum they've done. Well done guys in marketing, good job. With their hard drive series, they had different colours that represented different tasks, but SSDs are a very, very different beast, with their architecture being far more technical overall and not as well known as the architecture behind hard drives, which has been around for decades upon decades. So with this SSD series, I'm going to talk about each of the ranges that they have put out there. Now, it's worth highlighting a few things straight off the bat. One, there has been other WD SSD ranges in the past which have been sadly thrown to the wayside, and this has been in the pursuit of this perfect range from them. Additionally, there are SanDisk SSDs as well, and I'm not really going to feature them in this video because although WD and SanDisk are like that, it's worth highlighting that this video is just about the WD ranges, although I will kind of mention SanDisk from time to time, so do factor them into your decisions. But if you're dedicated to buying a WD SSD, this is the video for you. Now, before I even go into these ranges, it's worth highlighting that throughout this I'm going to be using certain terminology. Now, I've already made a video where I covered all the different SSD terminology and what it all means, but I'll give a very, very quick intro now to save you watching that video, which I think is well around 12-14 minutes long. So straight away off the bat, terms we'll be using are ones like TCO, which is total cost of ownership. This is basically what an SSD is going to cost you or your business, and that includes everything from the running of electricity to the devices it's in, to the amount of data it's going to consume and support your business overall, as well as data writes per day and stuff like that, and mean time between failure. Total cost of ownership is basically the all-encompassing figure for that drive. On top of that, IOPS, or input-output operations per second, that's effectively how many the smallest operations this SSD could perform, higher the better, often measured in thousands or tens or hundreds of thousands. Terabytes written is TBW, which is another one where it's the amount of data that will be written to a drive over its entire lifetime. That is accompanied with another one called DWPD, which is data writes per day, and that is effectively an average based on the total available capacity against 365 days in a year against the length of the warranty. How often can you fully write an entire disk to its capacity, often measured as a decimal figure. Then you've got mean time between failure. This is a measurement of hours, and it's the expected lifespan of a device in hours before your first failure downtime. There's more to it than that, and SSDs aren't really measured by MTBF anymore, but it's still a figure they utilize. And there's other ones that are more technical, like ECC, error correction code even, and this is the kind of a double checksum system where data is measured at the beginning and the end of a transfer, and if there's been a change in the second figure, it then auto repairs itself. Not all SSDs have this, and a lot of that is to do with a little bit of DRAM inside some SSDs. Then you've got trim. Trim is when an SSD has got an outside area that can be utilized. You may have heard things with SSDs being deleted, or when you delete a file. With trim, what happens is a non-trim enabled SSD is a drive that when you delete a file, it doesn't really delete it, it just severs all access to it and leaves it derelict, and then it can be written over at a later date. Trim ensures data is completely deleted upon a deletion, completely removed from the SSD, not just awaiting writing over. And then there's the NAND that we're going to mention throughout this video, which will predominantly be very vaguely SLC, single layer cells, which are kind of the thin, they're basically the earliest form of SSD currently still available, which is a single layer of data, so you get great robustness, but terrible capacity overall. MLC, which is multi-layered cell, multi-leveled cell in some cases, and that is when the SSD has got two layers, so it can hold 2 bits of data and more capacity, but not quite as robust because of the 2 layers and everything being thinned out. Unsurprisingly, TLC, triple layer, same principle with everything scaling the other way. And you've got other ones like 3D NAND, which utilizes TLC or MLC, and that stacks data vertically as opposed to horizontally across chips, and therefore makes it much quicker to access overall and increases capacity as well. And you've got other NAND obviously featured in the background like quad layer, QLC and stuff like that. And finally, we can talk about over-provisioning, and over-provisioning is when a disk has got an extra kind of buffer room off space. You see it more and more in drives that are measured 960 gigabytes versus 1 terabyte or 1024 gigabytes, and that kind of scaling we see, that's over provisioning when there's a little bit of extra storage that they've chose to remove from the central storage so the device can use it as a system of overlap. It's quite useful. But those are the common terms, and I know we're hitting the 6-7 minute mark before we've really got to the meat of this. I do apologise, but let's get straight into it. Right, so the entry-level SSD in terms of WD series is, of course, the Blue. Blue has been WD's kind of entry-level hard drive for a number of reasons, and it continues to be so. It's for desktop use, it's for utilisation in common single drive use scenarios. Now, the WD Blue range arrives in two formats. There's a SATA and there's an NVMe version. Let's start with the SATA one, and I am using a tablet. A lot of tech spec today, and hopefully it's on this side of the screen here. Now, the WD Blue, a non-NVMe drive, that it arrives in 250 gig to 4 terabytes in size. SATA and a little M2 version as well, but still SATA. And on top of that, it has speeds of up to 530 megabytes per second read-write, which is pretty standard for SATA, but still pretty good thanks to that 3D NAND. It's 95,000 to 81,000 IOPS, and that's read-write respectively. And on top of that, it has a data writes per day of 0.3. So that's a third of the drive can be filled per day repeatedly, which is respectable but not fantastic. When you look at top-end SSDs, they're getting higher to the 1.0, and in some cases even more than that in data writes per day. But it does arrive with 5 years manufacturer's warranty and an APF of 1.75. So it's a fairly respectable SSD. They've not just chucked any old nonsense out there with some poor NAND. It's a great entry point. And the NVMe equivalent with that, again, for desktop users, is still pretty respectable, even for an affordable NVMe. Arriving at capacities between 250 and 1 terabyte, it's not hitting the heights, and it's definitely not touching the toes of some of the other SSD ranges from WD, but it does a respectable job. And that NVMe arrives with a 2,400 megabytes per second read and 1,950 megabytes per second write, which again, very respectable. And again, a lot of that is because of the NAND they're utilising, and of course those speeds are possible thanks to NVMe. But with a data writes per day of 0.37, it's higher than that SATA one, but it's still fairly normal. You know, it's all right. You're not really going to be, if you're utilising this in a desktop scenario, you're not really going to be filling the whole drive every single day, and 0.3 is pretty good, particularly on that terabyte model where you're looking at 333 gigabytes, you know, approximately. You're not going to be putting more data than that on this drive every single day with an erase write. But it does arrive with that 5-year warranty and 1.7 million MTBF. So the WD Blue series fits the bill. It arrives to desktop users and basic SSD users that are looking for a drive to do a reliable, robust task. Now, in contrast with the WD Blue, let's talk about the WD Green, because these are two ranges from WD's hard drive series that kind of had people kind of choosing between them through reasons of economy or power efficiency. And kind of similar is true in the stake of the WD Green, but it's worth mentioning that the things that have changed between WD Green SSD and WD Blue SSD are far more technical, and you have to really dig a little deeper to see it. So first and foremost, the WD Green SSD series doesn't arrive in NVMe or any of that other stuff. It only arrives in SATA. On top of that, it arrives with only 120 gig to 1 terabyte capacity. So none of the big 2 and 4 TB capacities are available with WD Green. Now, it can be utilised in those basic day-to-day operations, just like we mentioned with Blue, but it doesn't have a lot of the rigidity and variation of use that the WD Blue does provide. It's more designed for devices that you're going to have turned on, but they're not core mission critical devices. Maybe you'll be using them just in the background vaguely, and they'll be supporting, basic standard devices, but not things you're going to interact with on a regular basis, because these are not SSDs that are designed for the long haul in the same way WD Blue and indeed Black and some of the other ranges that I'll talk about later are. Now, it arrives with SLC, so single layer cell NAND chips. So again, nice, quite robust, but not really give you a huge amount in terms of capacity overall. And even the controller is nowhere near as comprehensive as some of the ones we see at the higher tiers from WD. Arriving in both M2 and SATA, they do have potential to be used as SSD storage, but because of the rigidity not being quite as good as that of WD Blue, I wouldn't recommend it overall. Now, arriving at a read-write speed of around 530 megabytes per second, up to that at least, you are getting good performance promised at the top end, but with a much lower IOPS there of 25K to 15K read-write IOPS respectively, you're not going to hit those top speeds unless you're in an optimal performance environment with a supporting device that's going to help this along. Now, with a data drive writes per day of 0.3 and a 3-year warranty and a 1 million MTBF, you are looking at a drive that doesn't have the long-term capabilities of the Blue. With a 2-year shorter warranty, that has resulted in a lower terabytes written overall, and of course, the lower MTBF is a factor too, and these are just indicators that WD have to provide that show that this drive isn't quite as long-term as the Blue. Now, on the one hand, this could all be marketing rhetoric in one respect, the fact that they've shown this one's here and this one's here, but I don't think it is. When you look at the WD Green series in terms of performance, and when we've done our NAS performances at least, it has shown that like for like, the Green is not outperforming the Blue. So again, go for the WD Blue for somewhere where you want an SSD in a single SSD environment where performance is useful, but not end of the world, but you're still going to rely on it. But go for the WD Green for more throwaway instances and where you're going to be utilizing an SSD where it's not make or break, both in terms of performance and the rigidity of the SSD retaining the data and performance. So moving forward, we can talk about another key WD range that's been around for a long time that has had a recent upgrade, and that is the WD Black SSD series. Now, WD Black is their kind of entry top, well, it's not even entry level, it is their performance class NVMe. It's the one that if you are working in enterprise, if you're a content creator, if your data, not in terms of just speed, but bandwidth, access and reliability are important to your business, WD Black should be considered your entry point. WD Black arrives with 3D NAND chips, and it is known as the SN750 series. WD Black arriving at 250 gig all the way up to 2 terabytes of storage does give you a lot more to play with than that WD Green we just talked about. On top of that, you utilize PCIe Gen 3, and that gives you the great NVMe performance of well in excess of 3000 with a reported speed of 3400 megabytes per second read and 2900 megabytes per second write. You are getting some decent throughput for this if you are using a PCIe NVMe supported device. With IOPS ranging in the hundreds of thousands, that's 410,000 and 550,000 respectively of read and write IOPS, it's an impressive figure that really does deliver. But the data writes per day being rated at 0.3 is a little disheartening. I was kind of assuming this would live at the 0.5, maybe 0.8. Even some of these higher end ones, like we look at the Gold, give you data writes per day, which are insane. Don't get me wrong, the terabytes written with a 5-year warranty drive like this is going to be very, very good, particularly at the top level, which obviously is scaling down. And with the MTBF at 1.75 million hours, it is a respectable class drive for NVMe. But it's not their fastest NVMe, which I'll get to later on at the end of the video. But if you are a content creator and you are looking to use an NVMe in a single drive environment, And your data is not only important in terms of its speed, but in terms of its reliability, access, and long-term redundancy. WD Black may well be the drive for you. But what if you want to use these SSDs in a group environment? What if we're talking about RAID? What if we're talking about NAS? Well, of course, WD Red. WD Red has been around for a while now as a hard drive for a very, very long time. But for around a year now, WD have had a range of SSDs for NAS environments being used for live access and caching. Now, these drives arrive in several forms. Currently, they're only available in SATA, but I do get an inkling and a little bit of a notice there that an NVMe one is on the horizon. But the WD Red SSD range, known as the SA500, is a decent little range. We've done tests on it before. We've got WD Red right here. In fact, this is one that we were using for our testing a wee while ago. And that WD Red SSD is designed for long-term caching. It's designed to be robust. It's designed for RAID environments, because when you're having caching on a NAS, you will have multiple drives, so you can utilize read and write caching in groups of 2 or 4 or more using a RAID 5, a RAID 1, sometimes a RAID 0 if you're going to use read-only or write-only caching, but I don't recommend that overall in terms of performance. But WD Red SSDs, for me, have proven they're more than a gimmick. And once you dig into the specifications, you do learn a great deal more. It's utilizing WD's 3D NAND once again and arriving in as little as 500 gig all the way up to 4 terabytes. We're looking at some good capacity limits there. And again, caching on a NAS should be around 10%. So a 4 TB NAS, 4 TB SSD for NAS is necessary if you are looking at serious drive sizes. The WD Red 14 TB drive, for example, are compatible with like 24-bay servers. So in those scenarios, you're going to need some seriously large amounts of SSD pulled together for your tiered storage or caching. Arriving in 2.5-inch SATA and M2 SATA. That means you are looking at 6 gigabits per second maximum speed, which is a little bit of a downer. And hopefully when an SSD NVMe version arrives, this will be a different story. But in the meantime, you are looking at around 530 megabytes per second read-write. Little bounce there between them, maybe at 540. And on top of that, IOPS in the tens of thousands at 95 and 82,000 IOPS respectively of read and write. Now, data writes per day, once again at 0.38. We're still living at that 0.3 mark, which is a little bit of a bummer. But I think with SSDs, it is going to be a question of data being rewritten to them all the time. And this is a scenario where data writes per day and terabytes written plays a far bigger part, because all the SSDs we talked about up till now aren't generally used for caching. They're used for storage that's going to sit there with periodic amounts of deletion. In the case of an SSD being used for cache, there's a huge amount of deletion and rewriting happening every single day. And therefore, 0.38 data writes per day, drive writes per day, not great. It's good, but it could be better. And hopefully, we will see better than that with an NVMe Pro series. But we've still got the best yet to come on this. With a 5 years warranty and 2 million hours of MTBF, it's still a very respectable drive, and it gives you higher spec than pretty much every SSD that we talked about in today's range, with the exception in a few places of the NVMe Black. But with the WD Red SSDs for NAS, I do think we do have a respectable drive that a number of you that want to utilize SSDs in your NAS environment do have an optimal tool for that. But what about the top tier? What about the people right there at enterprise and data centers? I think they're going to look at the specs of that SATA-based WD Red SSD and be a little bit underwhelmed, and rightly so, because the hard drives and SAS hard drives and SAS SSDs they're going to be utilizing will actually consider the speeds we just discussed a bit of a bottleneck. They'll consider the robustness, such as it is of the WD Red SSDs, to not quite be up there for their elite standards. And for them, it's the Gold series. First unveiled on this channel, I believe at the start of this year, the WD Gold series of SSD arrive in some, frankly, incredible statistics wrapped around them. Arriving in NVMe U2 form, so that is that kind of SAS-looking connection there on the rear that arrives with support of PCIe 3.1 times 4 and that support is that U2 form factor presents a great deal more in terms of overall potential capacity moving forward, as well as the NAND and the controller involved. It is 3D NAND once again, but those data writes per day are leapt up to 0.8. So 80% of the drive can be completely rewritten every single day, which is fairly impressive. And it's got that 5-year warranty and 2 million hours MTBF, which is again on par, at least in those two regards, with the WD Red. But with 250 gig to 2 terabytes of storage currently available and bigger ones just on the horizon, enterprise users will definitely need to look at the WD Gold in terms of their caching and general storage needs at this higher level. Arriving at that NVMe PCIe 3.1 times 4. On top of that, it is a 3,100 megabytes per second read and 1,800 megabytes per second write reported speed, which is a little less than I would have liked, if I'm honest. I kind of assumed we might be hitting the 4,000, maybe even close to the 5 that we've seen from the Nitro from Seagate. But that's because they, WD, have got a pot. They've got fingers in every pie in regards to SanDisk and, of course, their own UltraStar series with their own respective SSDs. So WD just to live within its paddock. And if these speeds don't seem top tier enough for you, or performance values, that's when you have to consider moving up into these higher echelons of storage. On top of that, it has got IOPS rated at 465,000 read sequential random IOPS, but the 65,000 reported write IOPS is a little lower than I would have liked. And again, it's another one of those reasons why the enterprise users, this might be a sticking point for some, where they will make that jump towards the UltraStar series of SSDs. Now, they are a respectable range of SSDs, but with them comes that price tag. You get the reliability, of course, and you get the performance too. But the price tag of those is incredible, and often people will be thrown away just by that, because these are SSDs to be built in flash station servers, which will have 12, 16, 24 bays, which is phenomenal throughput. And this is for AI simulations and, you know, recreating real huge arrays of data processing and recreating them constantly, not just VMs, but huge amounts of random data creation and deletion is something where these level of SSDs need to live. And the WD Gold gives you a hell of a lot within the WD range, but then it just touches the toes of these bigger giants behind them. Now, I mentioned the SanDisk, ones like the SanDisk Extreme, the Plus, the Extreme Pro 3D, and then of course you've got the UltraStar ones, which give you a huge amount of throughput there at the top end. But this has been the WD range of SSDs and which one you should buy. I hope you found this video helpful and it's helped you understand how their family works and where each range lives in a family tree. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this video helpful, do let me know in the comments. Click like if you enjoyed it. In the comments, in the description, you'll also find links to span.com and of course NAS Compares 2, where I've done a breakdown of all of these ranges to make it a lot easier to understand. And of course, click subscribe to learn more. I'll see you next time.